The recruitment hall buzzed with nervous energy as 300 alien cadets from across the galaxy shuffled into formation. Their scales, fur, tentacles, and chitinous plates gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of Nexus Military Academy. Among them stood one human, 19-year-old Jake Morrison, looking supremely out of place with his soft pink skin and laughably small frame. "Look what the void spat out," hissed Vex, a 7-foot-tall Krillian whose razor-sharp mandibles clicked with amusement. His 3 companions, each representing different species from the Galactic Coalition, chuckled in their own disturbing ways. Jake rolled his eyes. "Oh, great," the welcoming committee. "Let me guess. You're here to tell me how humans don't belong in real military academies." "Exactly right. Meet Sack," growled Throck, a heavily muscled Gorvani whose tusks protruded from his lower jaw. "This isn't some playground for your pathetic species." "Pathetic?" Jake raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with mock concern. "That's interesting, considering we're the ones who ended the Zirian War in 6 months, while your coalition spent 3 decades getting their collective butts kicked." The alien cadets fell silent. The Zirian War was still a sore subject throughout the galaxy. The insectoid Zirions had swept through 17 star systems, their hive mind proving nearly impossible to defeat through conventional military tactics. The Coalition had thrown everything at them, wave after wave of their finest warriors, only to watch entire fleets disappear into the endless swarm. Then Earth joined the fight. That was different, Vex snarled, though his confidence seemed shaken. "Humans got lucky." "Lucky?" Jake's laugh was sharp and cold. "Is that what you call systematically dismantling a hive mind that had been eating your lunch for 30 years? Sure, let's call it luck." Before the confrontation could escalate further, the massive doors at the front of the hall crashed open with a thunderous boom. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as General Zar'thok entered, his 8-foot frame casting an imposing shadow across the assembled cadets. General Zar'thok was a legend throughout the galaxy, a Veltar warrior whose species had conquered half the known universe before joining the Coalition. His 4 arms ended in claws that could slice through battle armor, and his reptilian face bore scars from 100 different conflicts. Most terrifying of all were his eyes, cold amber orbs that seemed to catalog every weakness of anyone they gazed upon. "Welcome to Nexus Military Academy." The general's voice boomed across the hall, each word carefully measured and threatening. "You are here because your species believe you represent their finest military potential. Most of you are wrong." His gaze swept across the assembled cadets, like a predator evaluating prey. When his eyes landed on Jake, they lingered for just a moment longer than the rest, and Jake could have sworn he saw the faintest hint of curiosity. "Over the next 6 months, you will be tested beyond your limits. Combat scenarios that will break your minds. Strategic challenges that will expose your weaknesses. Physical trials that will separate the warriors from pretenders." The general's 4 arms gestured dramatically as he spoke. "By the end of this program, 90% of you will have washed out in disgrace." A nervous murmur rippled through the assembled cadets. Jake noticed how several of the alien recruits seemed to shrink under the general's withering gaze. However, General Zar'thok continued, his voice taking on an even more ominous tone. "Before we begin your formal training, we have a tradition here at Nexus Academy. A simple test to separate those with warrior potential from those who should return home to their mothers." The general stepped forward, positioning himself in the center of the formation, his 4 arms spread wide in what could have been either a welcoming gesture or threat. "I will raise one hand," he announced, his amber eyes gleaming with predatory interest. "The first cadet to step forward and take that hand will demonstrate the courage necessary to lead. The rest will follow, as is natural." Jake felt his stomach clench. This wasn't just a test of courage. It was a power play. The general was establishing dominance from the very first moment, showing every cadet in the room that he was the apex predator in this particular food chain. "Well," General Zar'thok raised his upper right hand, palm open, waiting. "Who among you has the spine to claim leadership?" Silence stretched across the hall like a taut wire. 300 pairs of eyes darted nervously between each other and the general's outstretched hand. These were supposed to be the finest warriors from dozens of species, yet none of them moved. Jake could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, to blend into the crowd, to let someone else take the risk. The general was clearly testing them, and stepping forward could mean anything from instant promotion to immediate expulsion. But then Jake caught sight of Vex and his crew, their expressions smugly satisfied as they waited for the human to cower with the rest. Their earlier words echoed in his mind. Pathetic species, doesn't belong, got lucky. A slow grin spread across Jake's face. "Oh, what the hell?" he muttered under his breath. Jake stepped forward with deliberate confidence, his boots clicking against the metal floor in the absolute silence of the hall. Every eye in the room followed his movement as he approached the towering alien general. General Zar'thok's expression remained unreadable, but Jake caught the slightest tilt of his reptilian head, as if the human's approach had genuinely surprised him. "Cadet Morrison, isn't it?" The general's voice carried a hint of amusement. "The human?" "That's right, sir," Jake replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Though I prefer to think of myself as the guy who's about to make this interesting." A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the assembled cadets. Nobody spoke to General Zar'thok with anything approaching casual confidence, let alone outright sass. The general's amber eyes narrowed, studying Jake with renewed interest. "Interesting choice of words, cadet. Do you understand what you're volunteering for?" "Honestly, sir, not a clue." Jake's grin widened. "But judging by everyone else's reactions, it's either going to be really fun or really painful. Either way, beat standing around wondering." For a moment that felt like an eternity, the two faced each other in the center of the hall. The massive alien warrior with his scarred hide and predatory grace, and the small human who looked like he should be playing video games instead of facing down galactic legends. Then something unexpected happened. General Zar'thok chuckled. It wasn't a warm sound by any stretch of the imagination. It was the kind of laugh a shark might make if sharks found something darkly amusing right before they bit you in half. But it was definitely a laugh. "Very well, Cadet Morrison," the general said, his forearms shifting position with fluid precision. "Let's see what humanity's latest contribution to galactic warfare can accomplish." Jake reached out toward the general's extended hand, but just as her fingers were about to touch, General Zar'thok's expression shifted. The amusement vanished, replaced by something much more dangerous. "One moment, human." The general's voice turned arctic. His other three hands moved with lightning speed, positioning themselves around Jake's approaching arm. "Before we continue, perhaps you should understand exactly what you're volunteering for." The temperature in the hall seemed to plummet further. Jake could feel the weight of 300 alien stares boring into his back, most probably expecting to witness his immediate and spectacular humiliation. "You see," General Zar'thok continued, his clawed fingers hovering mere inches from Jake's extended arm, "this particular tradition has some rather specific rules. Rules that have remained unchanged for over 2 centuries. Jake's arm remained steady, though every muscle in his body was screaming at him to pull back. "What kind of rules, sir?" "The kind that separate true warriors from clever pretenders," the general replied. His amber eyes locked onto Jake's with predatory intensity. "When a cadet steps forward to take my hand, they accept a challenge of strength. Physical strength, mental fortitude, and most importantly, the will to endure." The silence in the hall was so complete that Jake could hear his own pulse hammering in his ears. Around him, the alien cadets watched with a mixture of anticipation and relief that they hadn't been foolish enough to step forward first. "The challenge is simple," General Zar'thok explained, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the massive room. "You will attempt to take my hand and hold it for exactly 60 seconds. I, naturally, would do everything in my considerable power to prevent this from happening." Jake felt his stomach drop. The general's reputation wasn't just built on tactical brilliance. The Veltar were famous throughout the galaxy for their incredible physical strength. General Zar'thok could probably crush a human skull with one hand, while solving tactical equations with the other 3. "And if I fail?" Jake asked, surprised at how steady his own voice sounded. "Then you will have demonstrated to your fellow cadets that humanity's much-vaunted military prowess was indeed nothing more than luck," the general replied. "You will be immediately expelled from the academy and return to Earth with a detailed report explaining your spectacular failure." The assembled alien cadets began murmuring among themselves, the sound like angry insects buzzing in the rafters. Jake could practically feel their anticipation. This was it, the moment when the uppity human would finally be put in his place. But Jake just smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of expression that had made the Zirions second-guess their invasion strategy right before human fleets started appearing in their supposedly impregnable systems. 60 seconds? Jake asked, rolling his shoulders to loosen the tension. That's it. That's it, General Zar'thok confirmed. Though I should mention, in the 200-year history of this tradition, exactly 7 cadets have managed to complete the challenge. None of them were human. Well, Jake said, flexing his fingers as he prepared to reach for the general's hand, that's about to change. The hall erupted in shocked gasps and nervous laughter. Even some of the more seasoned alien cadets looked impressed by the human's sheer audacity, though whether they admired his courage or pitied his stupidity remained to be seen. General Zar'thok's expression shifted again, this time to something that might have been genuine respect mixed with predatory anticipation. Excellent, the general said, his 4 arms positioning themselves with fluid precision. Then let us see what Earth's warriors are truly made of. Jake reached forward, his human hand extending toward the general's massive clawed appendage. The moment their skin made contact, he understood exactly why so few cadets had ever completed this challenge. The general's grip was like being caught in an industrial hydraulic press operated by someone with a very personal grudge against your continued existence. Jake's bones creaked under the pressure as General Zar'thok's grip tightened around his hand, like a living vice. The alien's claws, each one capable of punching through battle armor, pressed against Jake's knuckles with calculated precision. Not enough to break anything immediately, but more than enough to send shooting pains up his arm. 10 seconds, announced Lieutenant Crix, a spider-like arachnoid whose 8 eyes tracked every micro-expression on Jake's face. Her voice carried across the silent hall with clinical detachment. Jake gritted his teeth, fighting to keep his expression neutral as the general increased the pressure. Around him, 300 alien cadets watched with rapt attention, most clearly expecting the human to tap out within the first 30 seconds. You know, Jake managed through clenched teeth. This really brings back memories of family dinners. My grandmother had a grip just like this when she caught me sneaking cookies. A few surprised chuckles rippled through the assembled cadets. Even General Zar'thok's amber eyes showed a flicker of amusement, though his grip didn't loosen by so much as a millimeter. 20 seconds, Lieutenant Crix announced. The pain was becoming serious now. Jake could feel his circulation being cut off as the general's 4-fingered hand completely engulfed his own. But instead of panic, he felt something else entirely. A cold, calculating anger that had nothing to do with physical discomfort and everything to do with the smug expressions on the alien faces surrounding him. Comfortable, Cadet Morrison? General Zar'thok inquired, his reptilian features betraying no effort despite the crushing force he was applying. Oh, absolutely, Jake replied, his voice steady despite the agony shooting through his arm. Though I have to ask, is this really the best you can do? Because, honestly, I was expecting something more challenging from the legendary General Zar'thok. The hall went dead silent. Even Lieutenant Crix paused in her countdown, her compound eyes widening in disbelief. General Zar'thok's expression darkened. 30 seconds. The pressure increased dramatically. Jake felt something pop at his wrist, probably a ligament giving way under the stress. White-hot pain lanced up his forearm, and for a moment his vision blurred. But he held on, his grip remaining firm around the general's massive hand. You know what the funny thing is? Jake continued conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather instead of engaging in a contest that was slowly destroying his hand. Everyone keeps talking about how humans got lucky during the Zirion War. 35 seconds, Lieutenant Crix called out, her voice barely audible over the tension in the room. But see, that's not really accurate. Jake pressed on, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought to maintain his composure. Because luck implies random chance. What actually happened was that we studied your tactics for about 15 minutes and realized you were fighting the Zirions all wrong. General Zar'thok's grip tightened further, and Jake was certain he heard actual bones creaking now. But his anger was building to match the pain, and anger had always been an excellent motivator for humans. 40 seconds. The thing about hive minds, Jake explained, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that was probably inadvisable given his current situation, is that they have a central weakness. Cut off the head, the body dies. But your coalition kept trying to fight them like they were individual opponents. 45 seconds, Lieutenant Crix announced. And now even she sounded impressed that the human was still conscious, let alone talking. So we did what humans do best, Jake continued, his grip somehow still solid despite the crushing force being applied to his hand. We ignored all your established military doctrine, broke every rule of engagement you considered sacred, and went straight for the throat. General Zar'thok was genuinely straining now. Jake could see the muscles in the alien's forearms tensing as he applied what had to be nearly his maximum strength. But Jake held on, his human stubbornness proving more resilient than anyone in the hall had anticipated. 50 seconds. The Zirian Queen was hiding in a moon-sized bioship in the Kepler system. Jake said, his voice now tight with pain but still audible throughout the hall. Your coalition had been trying to fight through 17 layers of drone defenders for 3 decades. We sent in a single stealth destroyer with a planet cracker warhead. 55 seconds. The final stretch. Jake's hand was completely numb now, his circulation cut off entirely. He could no longer feel his fingers, but somehow his grip remained locked around the general's massive appendage. It was as if his body had decided that letting go was simply not an option, regardless of what his nervous system thought about the situation. One ship, Jake continued, his voice now barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the absolute silence of the hall. One human crew, one very big explosion. War over. 58 seconds. 59 seconds. General Zar'thok was applying so much pressure now that Jake was amazed his bones hadn't simply turned to powder. But he held on, his grip as firm as when they had first made contact. 60 seconds, Lieutenant Crix announced. The hall exploded into chaos. 300 alien cadets began talking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of different languages and vocal ranges. Some sounded impressed, others disbelieving, and more than a few seemed genuinely angry that the human had somehow succeeded. General Zar'thok released Jake's hand immediately, stepping back with an expression that was impossible to read. Jake looked down at his appendage, which was already turning an impressive shade of purple and was swelling to roughly twice its normal size. Well, Jake said, flexing his fingers experimentally and wincing at the pain, that was educational. General Zar'thok stared at him for a long moment, his amber eyes calculating. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh. Not the dark chuckle from earlier, but genuine amusement that seemed to fill the entire hall. Remarkable, the general said, his forearms crossing in what Jake was learning to recognize as a gesture of respect among his species. In 2 centuries of this tradition, you are the first cadet to spend an entire 60 seconds delivering a tactical lecture. What can I say? Jake shrugged, immediately regretting the movement as it sent fresh waves of pain through his damaged hand. I'm a multitasker. The general's laughter subsided, but his expression remained one of genuine interest. Tell me, Cadet Morrison, was your analysis of the Zirian conflict accurate? Every word, Jake confirmed, though I simplified it a bit for dramatic effect. The actual planning took closer to 3 hours, and we used 2 destroyers instead of 1. The second ship was there for backup in case the first one missed. And the planet cracker warhead? Oh, that part was completely accurate. We don't mess around when it comes to eliminating existential threats. General Zar'thok nodded slowly, as if filing away this information for future reference. I see. And this tactical approach, this willingness to ignore established doctrine, this is typical of human military thinking. Jake grinned despite the throbbing pain in his hand. General, you have no idea. The alien commander turned to address the assembled cadets, his voice booming across the hall once again. Let this be your first lesson at Nexus Military Academy. Strength comes in many forms. Physical power is important, but mental resilience, tactical innovation, and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness can be equally valuable on the battlefield. His gaze swept across the crowd of alien faces, many of which still looked stunned by what they had witnessed. Cadet Morrison has demonstrated all three qualities in the space of 60 seconds. He has earned not only my respect, but position as squad leader for Training Group Alpha. The announcement sent another ripple of shock through the assembled cadets. Squad leader was typically a position reserved for the most physically impressive specimens, usually one of the larger predator species. Vex, the Krillian who had taunted Jake earlier, stepped forward with his mandibles clicking in agitation. General, with respect, the human barely survived your grip. How can someone so physically inferior lead a combat unit? General Zar'thok turned his attention to the 7-foot alien, his expression becoming decidedly less friendly. An excellent question, Cadet Vex. Perhaps you would like to volunteer for a demonstration? A demonstration of what, sir? Combat effectiveness, the general replied smoothly. Single combat hand-to-hand, you against our newly appointed squad leader. Standard academy rules. Fight until one opponent yields or is rendered unconscious. The hall fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. This wasn't nervous anticipation. This was a hushed expectation of impending violence. Jake looked down at his swollen, discolored hand, then back up at the towering Krillian, whose razor-sharp mandibles were designed for slicing through armored prey. General, Jake said carefully, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I should probably mention that I can't actually feel my right hand anymore. Then you'll have to make do with your left. General Zar'thok replied with what might have been a smile if his species had been capable of such expressions. Unless, of course, you prefer to decline the challenge? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Jake could feel every eye in the hall focused on him, waiting to see if the human who had just endured 60 seconds of crushing pressure would back down from a direct physical confrontation. Jake sighed dramatically. You know what? This day just keeps getting better and better. He turned to face Vex, who was flexing his claws with obvious anticipation. The Krillian stood nearly 2 feet taller than Jake, and probably outweighed him by at least 100 pounds of solid muscle and natural armor. Standard academy rules? Jake asked, rolling his shoulders to loosen up. Standard rules. General Zar'thok confirmed. No weapons, no lethal force. Fight continues until yield or unconsciousness. And just to be clear, Jake continued, when you say no weapons, that includes his natural claws, right? Vex's mandibles clicked with what was probably amusement. Afraid, little human? Not afraid, Jake replied, his voice taking on that same cold edge from earlier. Just making sure I understand the parameters before I embarrass you in front of 300 witnesses. The Krillian's amusement vanished, replaced by genuine anger. You talk too much for prey. And you don't talk nearly enough for someone who's about to get schooled by a species you consider inferior. Lieutenant Crick stepped forward, her 8 legs carrying her into position as referee. Combatants, take your positions. Fight begins on my mark. Jake moved to the center of the designated combat area, a square section of the floor marked out in glowing lines. Vex followed, his movements fluid and predatory. The alien's natural advantages were obvious. Reach, strength, speed, and natural weapons that could slice through most materials. Jake's advantages were less apparent, which was exactly how he preferred it. Ready? Lieutenant Crix called out. Ready, Vex confirmed, settling into what was clearly a practice fighting stance. Ready? Jake agreed, though his posture looked almost casual by comparison. Begin! Vex lunged forward immediately, his claws extending toward Jake's torso in a move designed to end the fight within seconds. It was a perfectly executed attack, precisely the kind of overwhelming first strike that had made the Krillians feared throughout their home sector. Jake wasn't there when the claws arrived. He had stepped aside at the last possible moment, using Vex's own momentum to send the larger alien stumbling past him. As the Krillian struggled to regain his balance, Jake delivered a sharp elbow strike to the nerve cluster at the base of his opponent's neck. Vex collapsed like a marionette with severed strings. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The hall erupted in shocked silence, then gradually filled with the sound of 300 aliens trying to process what they had just witnessed. Lieutenant Crix approached the unconscious Krillian, checking his vital signs with professional efficiency. Cadet Vex is unconscious, but unharmed. Victory to Cadet Morrison. Jake looked down at his fallen opponent, then back up at General Zar'thok, who was watching with what appeared to be intense satisfaction. Any other questions about human combat effectiveness? Jake asked the assembled cadets. No one volunteered an answer. General Zar'thok stepped forward, his forearms spread in a gesture of approval. Outstanding demonstration, Squad Leader Morrison. Report to Training Base 7 in 1 hour for your first command briefing. Class dismissed. As the alien cadets began filing out of the hall, many casting nervous glances back at Jake, the human found himself alone with the legendary general. "That was well done," General Zar'thok said, his voice carrying a note of genuine respect. "Though I suspect there's more to that technique than simple nerve strikes." Jake grinned. "Let's just say that humans have been fighting things bigger and stronger than us for a very long time. We've gotten pretty good at it." "Indeed. I look forward to seeing what other surprises your species has in store for us." As Jake headed toward the exit, cradling his injured hand, he couldn't help but smile. The next 6 months were going to be very interesting indeed. Behind him, General Zar'thok watched the human leave with calculating eyes, already planning the challenges that would truly test Earth's newest military representative. This was only the beginning.